to the Mindful Living podcast. I'm your host Sana as always, and this is interesting, listeners. Today's conversation is one we don't have enough low sex drive. What really causes it? For women, for men, and what kind of? How do physical or relationship factors or personal factors? How exactly are all of them intertwined into this? And to help me uncover some insights into this particular aspect, I have Dr. Diane Mueller. She is a board certified sexologist with dual doctorates in naturopathic and oriental medicine. She's also the founder of mylibidodoc.com and host of the Libido Lounge podcast. And yes, listeners, we are cutting through the noise and getting straight to the roots of low libido without shame, without fluff, without any stereotypes. So let's quickly dive in. So, Dr. Diane, welcome to the show, and it is such an honor to have you here.
Oh, thank you. It's so good to be here. And thank you for that intro. I mean, I think it's just so incredibly important to name what you said about having this conversation without shame.
Mm.
Because sadly, what I see is so like the topic around libido and sexuality and, and just like developing these healthy sexual relationships with our partner. It's the cornerstone for the topic
Mm.
of your podcast, right? For the idea of healthy living. And yet there's so much shame, like you said, around these topics. So thank you for naming that. I think there's a lot of we're going to do today around taking the shame, taking the taboo out, and really going deep with what's happening here.
Definitely, definitely, Dr. Diane. So let's start at the biological level. Um, so, what do you think are the main physical causes behind low libido in women and men that often get overlooked or ignored in typical medical checkups?
So from a physical standpoint, I there's many we could talk about, right? I could list 50 of them, but I often talk about the top 5 that I see most predominantly. So for the sake of not having 24 hours to be on this podcast, I will focus on the top 5 most common here from a physical perspective. And also, for your listeners, as I go through these, I want everybody to know that I have an online quiz. It's super easy. It's at libidoquiz.com. And if you go
Mhm.
to libidoquiz.com, it'll ask you questions to help identify out of these top 5 which ones, are really important for you to talk to your doctor about, what tests to get and all those things. So just
Mhm.
wanted to name that as a supportive thing. Now, in going through this, I'll start with the most obvious, but even with the most obvious, I have a couple caveats that are important for people to hear. So,
Okay.
the most obvious is the hormones. And so, it's easy to hear that and be like, oh, well, estrogen,
Yeah.
progesterone, testosterone. I've heard this before.
Yeah.
But here's what's interesting is testosterone, for example, we have moved and lowered the reference ranges of what normal is about 45% in the past 40 years. So what keeps happening is as our testosterone, as society gets worse and worse and worse and lower and lower and lower, in
Mm.
medicine we just say, well, let's just change what we're calling normal so more people fit in the normal range. So most of us in holistic medicine are finding that people feel from a testosterone perspective the best with
Mhm.
their energy, with their sex drive, with their muscle growth when that testosterone is really in that very upper quadrant of normal. So I
Mhm.
say this because we want to remember, right, that as a root cause, if you've had your levels checked and your doctor has been like, you're fine, it's not hormones, well, it's
Mhm.
very, very possible they're right. But it's also possible that they are not using this criteria to really evaluate it to say, well, actually, is testosterone in its optimal range? And even if it's in the conventional normal range, but it's not optimal, you could still have symptoms and you could still have low libido. So hormones is a number 1 out of 5. Do you want me to keep going or should
Mm.
I pause real fast?
Please, please, please go ahead.
Okay. So from there, The next thing we have is circulation. And this is very commonly thought about for men, right? So this is
Mhm.
where all of our Viagra's, our little blue pills, and
Mhm.
these kind of things come into play. But one of the unique points I think is important to mention on this podcast is this is not just true for men, that in order for females to actually experience lubrication, in order
Mhm.
for females to experience like sex actually feeling good and not being painful,
Mhm.
it requires the tissues to have a certain amount of engorgement, blood flow, just like men. Like women actually technically can get hard-ons too, right? It's just not going to look in the same way, but it is from a standpoint of their tissue becoming more filled with blood and
Mhm.
engorged with blood. That also happens to us ladies, and it's not talked about. And here's the other thing: is for women, it tends to take about 20 minutes for that blood flow to fully reach the genitals. So this is another. So it's like circulation is a big root cause, one of our top five from a physical perspective. But sometimes not spending enough time, especially for women, to allow the circulation, to happen. So it could be low circulation to the genital tissue for women due to things like inflammation or toxins or nutrient deficiencies can cause this,
Mhm.
right? Cholesterol, obviously. So it could be like one of those things that are causing the low blood flow for women. But it also could be the fact that women do typically need 20 minutes for the blood flow to fully get there. And so sometimes it's like, oh, the only real reason for this physical root cause might just be not spending enough time in foreplay. And it's perhaps there's, nothing, physically like to change other than, hey, you got to spend more time warming up. So far, then we have hormones,
Mhm.
circulation. The next one is neurological system. So, and there's
Mhm.
two different things in the neurological system. One thing is sometimes we are not sending the correct signal for our genitals to respond appropriately. And by sending, I mean the brain, right? There's like this
Mhm.
this miscommunication happening from the brain and the genitals.
Mhm.
Sometimes this can lead to like certain parts of our genitals being numb, right? It can
Mhm.
lead to, like,
Mhm.
lack of sensation, so this is a big, keynote
Mhm.
for this particular root cause. Other times, it can be due to trauma could happen,
Mhm.
here. That's another big root cause for the neurological system. Or there could be a link between the neurological system and our root cause number four, which is also an obvious one, which is stress. And I say that,
Mhm.
carefully because
Mhm.
obviously this is very cliche and people are like, "Oh, of course,
Yes.
stress is like," but let me go a little bit further because I don't want to give people like these cliche things.
Mhm.
But things that can happen with stress. So, like, yes, work stress, kid stress, life stress, health stress can all play a role. And I am talking about that, but I'm also talking about the link between neurological system, which is our root cause number three, and stress, our root cause number four. And one of the links here is our nervous system and the state that we're in. So, a lot of the time, as humans that have gone through a lot of ups and downs as human life has, our
Mhm.
nervous system is really in, that fight or flight
Yeah.
situation. And the process of experiencing pleasure is directly related to the process of being present. Right? So it's like, oh, yeah, I love taking like, people's favorite food. So think of your favorite food, chocolate cake, steak, oysters, whatever it is. And think about eating that whole meal or that whole piece of cake in 10 to 30 seconds, right? There's not a lot of pleasure in that. There's like basically no pleasure in that. Like now you're
Yeah.
maybe you have a tummy ache, there's no pleasure. And the same thing is true with sex. It's like an intimacy. If our nervous system is in this fight or flight where we're not able to drop into experiencing the pleasure of the moment
Mhm.
because our nervous system is wired that way, which most of ours are. I am constantly working on mine. Then it's very, very difficult to experience any sort of libido, drive, or pleasure. And then the fifth one, and again, like if you're hearing this and you're like, "Oh, there could be something else there." Yes, there's so many things in health, but again, we're doing the top 5. The
Mhm.
fifth one is pelvic floor health, and
Oh.
this gets a lot. Yeah, yeah, so you're understanding where I'm going with this,
Yeah.
I can tell by
Yeah.
your reaction, and this, it gets a little bit more, say conversation around the pelvic floor health is a little bit more talked about for females as compared to males, but
Mm.
it really is important for proper genital function, for making sure that there is not erectile dysfunction, for making sure that the sex feels good for a woman and there's not, pain. There's so much with the healthy functioning of the pelvic floor. And even things like Kegels, which are a lot of people are
Mhm.
doing, a lot of women are doing, a lot of women are not doing them correctly. Sometimes they're worsening the problem, sometimes they're not doing them at all. And
Mhm.
even men, like, we can see there's pelvic floor exercises for men, and some men even do, and this is gonna probably be a new one for some people, like style weightlifting. And it really what you're doing there is you're actually beginning to help to strengthen all those muscles in the penis in order to help also support the pelvic floor and all the attachments as well. So we need healthy pelvic floor functioning both for women and men. So that's another like myth I like to dispel around a lot of these things we say for men versus women or
Yeah.
women versus men are actually true for both genders.
No, that's true. That's true. Pelvic floor kind of has been really shocking to me because until this point of time, I was kind of aware that, okay, pelvic floor, especially for women, pelvic floor health it holds more importance when compared to men. But I think that myth has been very well busted, Dr. Diane, and I mean, I'm really, really overwhelmed knowing that there can be 50 or more than that, factors, physical causes here. But talking about hormones, so you mentioned that, it can take 20 minutes for women. Talking about circulation, it can take 20 minutes for the blood flow to get into the, vaginal walls. So, um, is that the reason why, it's kind of, told or talked about that especially women need more time to be prepared or be focused more on the foreplay? Is it just because of that, or is it something else?
It's certainly one huge I would say there it's one of the main reasons why that is, that are the way that estrogen impacts the female body
Mhm,
does lead for that slower responsiveness of blood flow as compared to men, and
mhm,
like I said, women really need hard-ons as well. They just,
mm,
I don't think they're emphasized because from a standpoint of, can you make sex happen without a hard-on?
mm.
Well, for a man, it's a lot harder if there's, no hard tissue and it's super soft, it's very hard to get any sort of penetrative sex happening.
Yeah.
For a woman, you can, use lube and go for it, and I am a fan of lube, by the way, but,
Okay.
you can do it, you can, use lube, in the first 30 seconds and go for it without her being aroused, and technically it could work, but it's not going to feel typically very good, because of that lack of blood flow even with lubrication, and
Mm,
so I think that's a huge reason for it, but here's another big reason for it that I've seen, another big pillar I talk about in, low libido is the interrelational pillar, right? Like, the pillar of, the way we relate to each other in our romantic partnerships.
mhm,
And one of the things that we see in also looking at the brain of women versus men, in men, we see that their brains are really good at compartmentalizing, right? And that's like blood flow at any given moment going specifically more strongly to certain parts of the brain, allowing them to focus. Women, one of our superpowers, and none of this is good or bad, it's just recognizing what our strengths are and where areas where, we can be in support for each other.
mhm.
Women, one of the superpowers for women is really multitasking, and it's like
Yeah,
it's taking in, so much information. So,
yeah,
the classic way we look at this, right, is like, okay, man watching a sports game or something like that, and, woman trying to get his attention, and it's like,
yeah,
hey, honey, 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 right?
yeah,
And for women, it's like the classic way of recognizing this is okay, she's maybe on the phone with her boss and she's changing a kid's diaper and she's
right.
realizing the floor needs to be vacuumed and she's making a list for the grocery store and all of that's happening at the same
At the
time,
same time, yeah.
right? So how that actually translates into sex is also from a mental standpoint, and really our brain in many ways is our largest sex organ. Like that, a lot of
Wow.
the revved up and like the feeling, right, is actually starting in the brain. And so, if the brain is more easily able to compartmentalize and focus, it's like it's so much easier for humans that have this, this ability to more quickly be like, oh, compartmentalize. I'm in sex mode now. I'm not thinking about all these things. And I've done lectures, like live lectures, where I ask an audience and, like, okay, well, how many people have ever done the grocery list during sex? And, women's hands fly up right and left all over the place. And it's not to say that a man's hand won't fly up here and there,
But
but
it's
it's like
more,
it's
more.
yeah, it's clear statistical difference, right?
Hmm.
And so another thing that can lead to that lag time, that differentiation between female and male arousal, is that oftentimes she will need time to actually get inside of her body, to like let go of the list in her head, to do different, types of activities to help her actually be present to the sensation of the pleasure and the touch. And this could be doing meditation. This is why I think sex and intimacy is one of our best mindfulness-based stress
Yeah.
reduction type of activities,
Hmm.
because it could be meditation, it could be visualization, it could be taking a warm bubble bath. It could be, be getting into bed with a partner and just starting the first, 10, 15, 20 minutes of intimacy with just sensual massage. It doesn't have to be anything sexual. But like the goal of this is like having that time for the woman to drop all of these things that are in her head because of being a really good multitasker, so she can actually get inside of her body and really be fully present for herself and with her partner.
That's such a great explanation, Dr. Diane. Lovely. This was really shocking to me when you mentioned about with regards to the standard levels of testosterone, or changing, or it can be like different, or maybe the doctor diagnosing doesn't have the right level of testosterone updated. So that is really, really shocking. What do you think? Where do you think is the disconnect in there, Dr. Dan?
As far as like where the disconnect is from why we haven't changed those levels.
Yes, yes, yes.
I mean, some of it is like medicine is done by looking, and these reference ranges are all based upon a standard deviation of wanting a lot of people to be normal.
Mhm,
So that's just like the general medical principle of saying when we look at these reference ranges, and we see this across the board, right? We see this with cholesterol as another example where we keep changing the reference ranges. And
mhm,
there's just an element of being like, well, there's a belief, a construct in medicine that that society, that we want most of society being normal.
mhm,
And so and the other thing that we see with reference ranges is reference ranges are not based upon optimal health. They're based upon severe disease. So we can also see that, oh, okay, well, if somebody is not having an intensely severe disease, they could
mhm,
still fall within normal. So I think
mhm,
because we have so, for so much of the world, not all the world is this way, but I think so much of the world is oriented to instead of be focused like on pure, like how can we be as optimal and healthy as possible, the
mhm,
orientations then how can we not have major disease, how can we stay out of like the worst case of heart disease and all that. So
mhm,
the reference ranges are really built upon that orientation, instead of saying like, "Hey, you know what? In health, in medicine, less work to actually make people as healthy as possible and as normal as possible." And what do we look at when we're actually testing ranges of people when they're saying, "Wow, I feel like so incredibly good." And I can't even imagine honestly feeling like that much, like a ton better. Like those are the people we should be studying and saying, where are they at and what is normal for them, and building our criteria around them.
mhm.
But we're building it around sick people instead of healthy people, which is one of the, I think, predominant, problems when we're looking at these reference ranges.
Hmm. Makes sense. Makes sense. And also, Diane, out of all these factors, does hygiene also play any role in there?
I mean, hygiene for, from a standpoint of libido, for, definitely a few different ways, right? So
Mhm,
there is, we could look at hygiene from the standpoint of our genitals. Well,
mhm,
if we're not taking good care of our ourselves and we're doing basic things like for women, wiping from back to front instead of front to back like we're supposed to, we
Mhm.
could wind up changing the microbiome, that microorganisms in the vagina.
Mm.
And this can actually lead to changes in pH, which for some people, like changing the pH of the vagina could lead to things like yeast infections or urinary tract infections. But
Mm.
sometimes it's not those things. And it just is like something's off, right? Something doesn't feel as good.
Mhm.
And so there's definitely like a, personal hygiene from that standpoint. Now, personal hygiene from that standpoint should come from, just healthy bathing practices,
Mhm.
eating a good diet, because what is happening in our gastrointestinal tract and the gut
Mhm.
microbiome there will directly impact the gut microbiome of the genitals.
Mhm.
So, some of that, and I do wanna make sure as I'm saying this, we wanna make sure to say, like, "Hey, this whole world around, like, douching, like, we gotta get that out." Like, that is not what I'm talking about hygiene. You can really disrupt the microbiome, and there's this practice that I've liked for a long time called yoni steam, where women like sit on a bucket of kind of like steaming water, and then herbs are in that bucket, and the herbs, and they're sitting on it without anything on, waist down. And so then these herbs are being the steam, almost like a tea, the herbs are going into their vaginal tract.
Okay.
And now I've seen some evidence that's actually showing that, hey, when we're actually putting these, the steam from these herbs, which has its own qualities, into the vaginal tract, we could actually be changing the microbiome of the vaginal tract. So now I'm really feeling like, oh my goodness, this is what, as much as this feels great for women,
Mhm.
we really need to be careful and just like natural soaps, eating healthy, drinking lots of water, these basics from a standpoint of genital hygiene. And then of course the other thing to say about hygiene is really, hey, if we, a lot of people are really impacted by their olfactory, their like smell senses. And so if we are finding that somebody is not taking care of themselves, they're not showering or, doing some of the basics as much as would be ideal, then
Mhm.
oftentimes that can actually be a big turnoff for people. And some people it's a bigger turnoff than others, but
Mhm.
certainly it's an important thing to bring up, smell and dental hygiene and those kind of
Mhm.
things.
Yeah. Okay. And yeah, that is really, really interesting. And from your experience, Dr. Diane, as you mentioned about neurological factors and stress, how much of low libido is tied to factors like upbringing, body image, or trauma versus purely physical causes?
I think from a standpoint of purely physical, I think it's an extremely rare thing. I
Mhm.
think it can be predominantly physical,
Okay.
and I think it could be predominantly non-physical, but most of the time we're going to have some sort of combination of, physical, personal, which are going to be like the things like how we view ourselves, our body image, our genital image, trauma, and then the third pillar there would be interpersonal. And so interpersonal is how we relate with our partner. And very frequently I see all three of these involved. And unfortunately, it's so common. It's like these physical root causes. And I hope everybody does go take libido quiz.
Mhm.
And these physical root causes that you can find there are like so common. However, it's also very common that people fix those things. And then it's like, well, something is still off with my libido,
Mhm.
right? So what is it? And that's where we get into these other categories, and that just that just happens almost majority of the time. That there's these things we can do beyond the physical to make things better. Now, trauma is absolutely, a big thing, right? And so if anybody is like healing from any sort of sexual trauma or abuse of any kind, like whether it's sexual or not, that definitely is like some time to work with a therapist that is really well trained in that specific area. But we also have to, mention too, like micro traumas. So like little
Mhm.
things that maybe were said when we're young, don't touch yourself down there, or like that's dirty, or like, these things that can sometimes be said in
Mhm.
passing, right? And when we're little and we don't have the understanding of like, okay, this is just what, a parent or a school teacher or authority figure is like saying. And like, maybe I don't need to believe, everything as truth. Like, we don't have that discernment when we're children. And so it's so easy to have something really simple, such as don't touch yourself down there, be like get into our psyche as, okay, well, this area is like shameful, or this area is
Mm.
bad, and this area is dirty. And there can be a lot of then shame and guilt, as like we mentioned at the beginning when we're talking about the nervous
Yeah.
system and the need to be in that, out of that fight or flight. Anything that like puts us into like a shame state or a guilty state, anything like that is going to have a tendency to get that survival part of our nervous system engaged.
Mm.
And that's normal, right? That's normal. However, from a standpoint of really being able to enjoy pleasure, it's very, very difficult to enjoy pleasure from that state. So all of that plays a role. And then body image, like it is definitely impossible, like pretty close to impossible for sure to have an orgasm, but
Mm.
second to enjoy pleasure if people are, thinking about like, oh my goodness, like how do my hips look from this angle, or like, oh, this
Mm.
angle, like this position, and now I have all my belly rolls hanging out, and like it's a very important thing to, work with oneself with and work with one's partner with, because if our head is in that place, it's like very that our head is so focused on not being good enough, or
Mm.
not being lovable enough, or not being pretty enough, or whatever it may be, that it's very difficult to enjoy pleasure. And the same has been studied in genital image too. And this is true for men, like with being worried about like, is their size correct?
Mm.
And for women, it's like, well, there's a lot of people going out and changing the size and shape of their labia, for example. So for women, it's like, should it be hairy? Should it not be hairy? Are my labia too big? Are they too small? Is my shape okay? Like, there's so many different things. And there's some projects out there. There's some really cool projects out there that are involving looking at and taking photographing all sorts of different vulvas, right? And
Mm.
there are these projects I just think are so amazing. They're not done, it's not pornography. It's literally just like tastefully done pictures of women's vulvas. And
Mm.
one of the goals of these kind of projects is to help women to get on sites and be like, "Oh my gosh, there's like for every different like, shape of a snowflake, there is a different shape of the woman's anatomy."
Mm.
And really beginning to actually see themselves as, as their unique, beautiful snowflake, instead of somebody that has to look, or a vulva that has to look a specific way. They're all uniquely different and beautiful. And I do think that plays a, answer to your question, a really big role.
Mm. Definitely. Definitely, doctor. It's really, really important. And um, another, aspect when we see the role of libido from a relationship perspective, a lot of people believe that, uh, with time, that desire, especially in long-term relationships, initially it's like m- maybe, multiple times in a single day, or every day or every week. It's like, roses and, bed of roses. But then with time, the frequency decreases, the desire to have sex fades away, the attraction is gone. What's the first step to reverse low libido in a long-term relationship?
Absolutely. Yeah, it's an important question. So all the things that we talked about also apply. And the what you're talking about with that new relationship, right? We call it in the sexology world new relationship energy. And it's largely driven by dopamine. So dopamine, this
Okay.
brain chemical,
Mhm.
is our motivation chemical, and it's our reward chemical. And how it works in new relationships is all about, hey, I don't know if they're going to call me. When are we going to see each other again? Oh, I finally have a date. And then what the mind does and how dopamine works is like, okay, let's say we finally get a date set up for a week from today and it's somebody new. Then the mind starts anticipating.
Mm.
And when it's anticipating and thinking about the date, and we're getting like thinking about what could happen and what we're going to wear and what we're going to talk about and where we're going to go and all the things, that's creating small amounts of dopamine that are driving us to be excited about that date. And then if the date goes well, then we get a huge amount of dopamine
Yeah.
reward. And so then we get a reward from it. And then, are they going to call? And when is our first kiss? And when are we going to make love for the first time? And so it's this continual newness and this continual thriving for this like dopamine rush largely. And then somewhere between, research says different things, anywhere between 3 and 18 months, that starts changing. I personally believe that one of the biggest reasons why we see that change
Mhm.
is not just time, like time plays a role, but the huge difference in that time zone is how fast we start to combine things, meaning like, okay, when are we, people deciding to live together or get married or
Oh.
have kids or combine their lives, and when people do this, what starts happening is things start becoming predictable. The novelty goes away. We know we're going to see our partner when we wake up. They usually get home at 6:30 or whatever time. We're going to see them at that time. We're going to probably do these three things. We're going to get ready to go to bed and we're going to repeat. And everything just becomes upon that or in that cycle. Well, that does not drive dopamine. Stability and dopamine, regularity and dopamine are just they are not very related. So, in longer term relationships, one of the biggest ways to start creating dopamine and start creating that desire and that passion is to bring novelty back. And it's not just about the novelty, it's about how we use the novelty. And novelty can be anything. Like, yes, it can be like all sorts of different types of wild sex, but it can also be as simple as trying it in a different bedroom, trying like tucking your hip bone a different way in a different position, right? It can be, just changing where you place your hands. It can be putting on a wig and making love with a wig on. There's tons of different ways we can create novelty. Now, how we can use it best to enhance our sex life is also having novelty date nights. And this is why this is important. So if we say, okay, well, maybe we're going to commit, and I call them bougie date nights, is what I call them. And maybe we're going to have a bougie date night twice a month. Like maybe we say that's our goal, right?
Mhm.
So we know our first one's going to be 2 weeks from now, and we decide, what are we gonna do for our novelty thing? So then we
Mhm.
talk about this, and then it gives us 2 weeks of material to flirt with, to think about, to text, to tease, and so then for those 2 weeks, we start by doing kinda like we did in the new relationship, like, okay, so, just in our time, we're driving, we're in the bath, we're in the shower, and it crosses our mind, like, "What am I gonna wear?" And like, "Oh, yeah, I wanna wear this outfit," and then we're gonna text our partner and be like, "Hey, I can't wait to show up," and we're flirting, we're using the novelty to create that anticipation and desire, just like we did early on in that relationship to create that dopamine. And then as we're thinking about it, that dopamine is there, then we do the novel thing and we get the reward. And it is just amazing what this can do to turn that passion back on. And if you're having a hard time getting started, I do have a what I call a yes, no, maybe list that can be really helpful. So if you guys go to
Mhm.
mysexdoc.com, you can download for free my yes, no, maybe list. And the yes, no, maybe list is a cool thing to do with yourself and your partner, and like you guys do your separate ones. And then you get ideas of like, oh, yeah, these are things that are novel that you're interested in. These are things that one or both of you are like, no way, absolutely not. And then for your maybes, then you can start to have conversations around like, okay, well, what kind of things would make the maybes turn into a yes? Or what kind of things make the maybes turn into a no? But it can be a starting point for your mind to start to say, oh, these are things that we can actually create from a novelty standpoint. So again, that's super easy. It's mysexdoc.com.
Brilliant, brilliant, Dr. Dan. Oh, okay. So many new things to learn, and that makes me really wonder. Do couples underestimate how much communication styles or the changes or the little tweaks that you mentioned, how they can impact physical intimacy? So, really, yeah. I mean, some really golden takeaways. And before we wrap up, Dr. Diane, when if someone who's listening to this conversation, they're struggling with low libido, where should they start? I mean, how do they know if it's something they can work on themselves or if it's time to see a professional like you?
Well, I would definitely start with, that libido quiz at libidoquiz.com because that is going to help, guide you with things like the um like the root causes of like the physical standpoint. Those are really important to rule in or out, give you ideas on, lab tests to make sure you're working with your doctor on those kind of things. So that's definitely the number one place I would start. I would also recommend you get my ebook for free, which you can at hotterlife.com. So my ebook has 5 easy steps for mind-blowing orgasms and romance. And we go through some of the things we talked about today and some other things. So that's super easy again, hotterlife.com. And if you do those kind of things, if you check out the yes, no, maybe list at mysexdoc.com, you try all these things and you're like, hey, I'm still stuck, then definitely reach out to me. And I have a lot of different programs and ways I work with people to, help them on a more supported way than those free resources. But
Mhm.
I would just start with, libidoquiz.com, hotterlife.com, and mysexdoc.com as free ways to get a lot of different ideas to try and get started before anything else.
Definitely. I'll make sure to have all the links in the show notes. And Dr. Dan, thank you. Thank you. This was really, really such an honest and practical conversation. And it really kind of highlights that low libido isn't a simple issue, and there is a hope, no matter whatever is the cause. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Sana. It's been a pleasure.
And to all the listeners out there, if you want to explore this further, I encourage all of you to connect with Dr. Diane and check out her work, and also check out her podcast, The Libido Lounge, and take the Libido quiz. And also, if you love this episode, stay connected with us and stay tuned to us for incredible, insightful, practical conversations like this. Thank you.